The Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Lynn Nottage on the story of race in Appalachia. The restaurateur and author Eddie Huang on racial stereotypes and diversity in Hollywood. Leon and Rosina Watson on marrying across the color line in 1950 when it was still illegal in much of the country. Over the past year, we have hosted weekly live conversations about race and ethnicity on Facebook, tackling topics that ranged from Black royalty to Latino baseball players to Asian American slurs. Race NYT, as we call the segment, is an extension of the crucial coverage on race in America and beyond that appears in the New York Times. We see it as a chance not only to explore important stories of race and what they mean to society, but also to give you, our readers and viewers, a chance to join the conversation. These subjects are not always easy to talk about. Why, for instance, is affordable housing built mostly in poor, heavily minority areas? What are the terms about race that make us uncomfortable? And what do the United States and major institutions like universities owe the descendants of the enslaved people they profited from? We explored these issues and more with a wide range of guests, including political strategists, filmmakers, academics, and Times viewers. Here are 5 takeaways from the show. Our viewers tuned in from Australia, Canada, Brazil, Trinidad, and beyond, voicing their views and concerns about race and ethnicity in the United States and overseas. Like racial minorities in the United States, Indigenous Australians are often relegated to the fringe of society. Craig Quartermain, an Aboriginal television reporter and comedian, told us we're window dressing, he said. In another segment, Nakialwi, an Indigenous writer and actor, told us, the equality of human rights is something in which Aboriginal people are still fighting for in many different ways in Australia. Frida Charriere, one of our viewers, joined the conversation with Mr. Quartermain from Canada. She said she could relate. I am First Nation and understand the comparisons with Aboriginal people worldwide. We were taken from our homes and put into schools. Madeline Van reached out to us, wondering how she should handle the racially offensive remarks she was hearing in her community. She is a white freelance writer in Virginia. What I need is an elevator speech to address this, she said. Does anyone have an idea of how to counter this? We invited her to join us on Facebook Live, and scores of viewers shared advice and experiences. Ronald Woolman said, you must be direct, honest, straightforward. Tara Leanne Cantrell said it wasn't that easy, especially when the racist comment comes from a client. Speaking up firmly means potential loss of not only their business, but my business as a whole since it's a tight-knit retirement community. Kaikan Liang, who confronted a colleague who was mocking Asian names, said, I had an greater than 1 hour conversation with the offender, who was genuinely contrite, but it left me emotionally exhausted. Carol Cutchall urged viewers to keep talking, keep the conversation open and ongoing. The first year of the Trump presidency has been marked by a vast racial chasm where perspectives often exist in different worlds. Are Confederate monuments symbols of hate or a preservation of history? What is a Black Republican to do in 2017? Americans feel increasingly divided. The Muslim American activists Aber Kawas and Dahlia Mugahed told us how they felt last month when the authorities quickly described an attack by a Muslim man in Manhattan as terrorism, while that term was never officially applied to a white man who fatally shot more than 50 people in Las Vegas weeks earlier. Pretty much we define terror attacks as something that's done by a Muslim, Ms. Kawas said. Michael Quessmore, who is Black, and Richard Marksbury, who is white, sparred over the removal of Confederate monuments in New Orleans. "I don't care if it's Andrew Jackson or George Washington or Martin Luther King, nothing should come down," Mr. Marksbury said. "If we have issues in contemporary society, that's the goal of educators and education, which is to explain who these people are, what they did, why we don't agree with it, etc." And Joseph Pinion and Ernest Lyles, two black Republicans, discussed how difficult it was to engage fellow black people on the issues when many of them view President Trump as racist. Whether we're talking about seaside resorts or Native American citizenship, history almost always finds its way into our conversations. Stanley Nelson, the documentary filmmaker, talked about black vacation spots like Oak Bluffs in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, and their roots in segregation. Chuck Hoskin Jr., Secretary of State for the Cherokee Nation, described how 19th-century slave ownership among the Cherokee affected the long-running legal battle over membership in the tribe. After the violence in Charlottesville, Isabel Wilkerson, the author and journalist, and Joshua D. Rothman, a historian, talked about how white supremacy flourished openly in middle-class communities in the 20th century. But as we've seen in the debates over Confederate monuments, coming to consensus on our history and its impact on our lives today can be challenging. These issues aren't theoretical for us. As black journalists, we face them in our day-to-day lives. John told viewers how he and his wife were treated recently in a Mexican restaurant. Rachel described her reaction whenever she is described as articulate or praised for her use of the English language. "How often are white journalists praised for that?" Our colleague, Natalie Nieves, who is Hispanic, shared her feelings about the day when a white coworker asked whether she was undocumented. "She isn't. We are living with these issues and, like so many of you, we're trying to make sense of them. Our experiences have convinced us, dialogue matters. If we want to understand one another, we need to talk to one another, and to listen."